It may not look like much, but in this tutorial we're going to set up our camera, change the background of our scene, add a sprite by working with a texture bitmap atlas and an iTexture region, and fix any problems that we have with our emulator. Let's get to it. What's going on, guys? In the last tutorial we learned a little bit about setting up our project and what these four methods mean. In this tutorial we're actually going to utilize them and make everything happen. First thing that we need to do is set up our camera again within our engine options here. So let's go ahead and create a new camera within this method, and it's just going to be a camera object, and might call this mCamera, something like that, and it's going to be a new camera object. And we're going to give it the parameters of pretty much the top left corner of our scene, which will be position 00. This again is the top left corner of the user's phone as well, and then the bottom right corner, which will be our camera width and our camera height that we set up previously. So just go ahead and put those in for your scene setup or your camera setup. And we can mess around with the camera width and height, and you can kind of see what the camera actually does itself. Now we also have to give it menu options. This will be like, hey, do we want this application to be full screen? Do we want it to be a portrait view or a landscape view? And we do that by creating engine options. Obviously that's what this method is looking for, as it's not void down here. It's actually looking for engine options. So let's create an engine options variable. We'll just give it the name of options, something like that, and it's going to be new engine options as well. And you can see four parameters. Again, like I said, there's a full screen, what kind of portrait or what kind of orientation we want, whether that be landscape or portrait. So again, the first parameter is going to be true because we want it to be full screen. Second parameter, we want to refer to the screen orientation class that comes with the AndEngine framework. And then we just hit dot and we have landscape or portrait. Our game is going to be landscape. As you can see, the width is 800, the height is 480. So the user should be playing the game on their phone that's turned sideways. That's landscape view. The next parameter I'll talk about here in a second. Just go ahead and hit new ratio resolution policy. And we are also going to give it two parameters. The width, again, this will be our camera width, and the height will be our camera height. I'll explain that in a second. Lastly, we have to define what camera we want our engine to control. So that's going to be mCamera that we just set up. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-F to format everything, and we can look at it this way. Now again, the first parameter, full screen, yeah, we want it to be full screen. Yeah, we want it to be a landscape, the second parameter. This third parameter is kind of where the magic happens of the framework, because there's so many different Android devices. This allows us to pretty much work with any Android device and not have our images stretched or our sprites stretched, backgrounds, any kind of, it'll keep the ratio the same on any device that it's running on. So that's pretty awesome. Again, we want it to correlate with what we're defining as our width and our height. Again, that's our camera dimensions. So that's kind of what that third parameter says. The last parameter is our actual camera that we set up here, and then we just want to return these options back to the engine. So just go ahead and return the options that we just set up here, and we are done with this method. The next thing I want to show you guys quickly and easily, we can change the background of our scene within our onCreateScene method down here. We've already defined a new scene, and now we can relate to that scene pretty simply by just saying set background, and we can set this as like a scrolling background or a image as a background, but as for now we're just going to set it to a color. So I'm going to say set background, new background, give it a color, maybe like a RGB value. I'm going to do like 0 for my red, 125 for my green, and 58 for my blue. Again, these can be anything 0 to 255, and it should work. So now we've set our background color to that bluish tint that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and it's as simple as that. We've set up the background of our scene. That's pretty easy. The next thing we're going to do is work with a simple sprite and use these other methods as well, the create resources and populate scene. So the thing I want you guys to do first is grab a resource or a picture that you're going to use and make sure you know the dimensions, because the dimensions of the picture is pretty important. If you guys are on our site, mybringback.com, somewhere in this tutorial you can download the image that I have as player and use that as well. one of the benefits of going to our website instead of just a YouTube channel. You can get some additional information about the tutorial, or if I miss something, I'll type it in there hopefully. But anyways, download an image or create an image. This player image is 64 pixels by 64 pixels. Like I said, you need to remember that. It's pretty important. I created a new folder within my assets called graphics. You can do that by right-clicking new folder and just give it GFX as the folder name and hit finish. I can't do it because I already created that folder, and throw your image in there. Make sure your image is lowercase. Mine is player.ping, and we are good to go. And that's our simple image here, just 64 pixels by 64 pixels. Alright, so now that we have an image that we want to work with, we're going to create two different variables within this class. One is going to be a texture region and one's going to be a texture atlas. We're going to do that by saying bitmap texture atlas, and we're going to say this is our player texture. Again, we won't define anything yet, and we also want to have an iTexture resource. I'll explain what these are in a second, but just get everything set up. Again, this is going to be our player texture region. Again, the life cycle of an AndEngine base class or base game activity goes: we load up our resources, our camera, and kind of the options, and then we're going to call this onCreateResources. What I'm going to do within here before our callback, where we say we're done with the application, or this method, I'm going to create a new method that we're going to call called load graphics, and then I'm just going to hover over and create that new method, and within here we're going to load all of our graphics. Right now we only have one graphic. When we have multiple graphics, it'll be a little bit different than this, but I just wanted to show you how we can set this up. It's going to be a bitmap texture atlas texture region factory. So you can either try and remember that, or just hit Control space and go down to bitmap texture atlas texture region factory, and this will allow us to kind of set the path, or basically refer to this graphics folder within our assets as our base for everything within this method, load graphics. So we do that by saying set asset base path and referring to the folder that we want, called graphics, and there should be a / in there as well, and that will set up the basis of all of our graphics. The next thing that we want to define is our player texture, which again is a bitmap texture atlas. Generally what an atlas is think of a map or a sprite sheet, if you guys are familiar with that. It's going to have a bunch of different pictures, and we can refer to a specific point on that big map or that huge picture, and then we can specify a certain region of the map later, such as our player region, and it will only take the images from that part of the atlas. Since we only have one image, like I said, we won't really need an atlas, but it's good practice to get into it. This series is comprehensive, so when we have more pictures, we'll come back and do this again, and you'll realize the process a little bit more thoroughly. So we're going to set up our player texture atlas, create a new bitmap texture atlas, and as you can see, there's a few different parameters. What texture manager do we want, and we're going to refer to this method down here called getTextureManager, and that's just going to manage all of our textures. Pretty awesome. Now these two parameters are extremely important with AndEngine. It's one of kind of the flaws with AndEngine. You have to use 2 to the power of x for the width and the height. So let's say you have an image that's 50 pixels by 50 pixels. Oops. This will cause you problems. These two variables, or these two parameters of a texture atlas, have to be 2 to the power of x. So for example, for the width, if we had this image of 50, we want to round up so it's 2 to the power of x. So what those are is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 10, 24. So always round up. Since our picture is 64 by 64, we can actually use that because that would be 2 to the 6th power. Kind of confusing, kind of stupid that you have to do 2 to the power of x. But again, the thing that's important is always round up for your texture atlas. Again, if you had like something that was like 500 pixels by 64 pixels, you'd want to round 500 up to 512, and then the 64 could also be 64 because again that's 2 to the power 6. Again, that's one of those things you just have to remember, so you might want to put a comment width and height power of 2. Well, not power of 2, but 2 to the x, whatever. You catch my drift. The next thing that we want to do is set up our player texture region. So just do again, boom. And again, this is a specific region on this atlas or on this map. Set our texture region up. We refer to the bitmap texture atlas texture region factory. And whoops, time. Man, I was not looking at my screen. So again, this is bitmap texture atlas texture region factory. We're going to say dot create from assets, and we're going to refer to our texture atlas as the first parameter. So we're going to say player texture atlas, or I should have labeled that texture atlas, but it's just going to be texture. And then our asset manager, we're going to refer to this, which is our assets folder plus whatever we managed, saying that we're going into the graphics folder. And then we have to refer to the specific image that we want. So our image is player.ping. As you can see over here, and the third and fourth parameter is going to be 0, 0, and basically what that's doing is it's referring to the point, or I'll explain that later. It's referring to the top left corner of our texture atlas, but again it's kind of confusing as of right now because we're only working with one image, but we're looking on our atlas at position 0, 0, and it's going to get that region or that texture region from the atlas. Okay, so again, kind of confusing stuff, but it will make sense. You just gotta trust me. Control Shift F to format it. So we have set up our regions. The next thing that we want to do is actually load these onto the scene because we are going to use them within this scene. So we might as well load them here. So we're going to refer to our texture region or texture, and we're just going to say load our atlas. So we're using it this scene, so we're loading it. If it was a scene that we don't need this, we can unload it as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So again, within this onCreate resources, we call the load graphics, which we do all this stuff, and then we say we're done loading our resources. We have set up our scene already and changed the background. The only other thing we have to do is populate the scene or add things to our scene as well. So we're going to go down here and we're actually going to create our sprite, which is basically just an object or a character or an enemy. Anything that's anything is pretty much a sprite within a game. So let's create a sprite variable, set this equal to sPlayer for sprite player, and whoops, what am I doing? And then we're going to say new sprite, and you see all these options, the XY value. So we're going to set this in the center of the screen somewhat by referring to the camera width divided by 2, so that's going to be relatively in the center, and also the camera height divided by 2. Our texture region is going to be that specific area in our texture atlas that we're referring to, so this will be our player texture region that we set up. And then for this buffer, we're going to relate to our engine. Since we extend the base game activity, we have some other options that we have access to, some other variables. One of them is, we're going to say .this.mEngine, and this is kind of our engine, so we're going to refer to that. I know that was a terrible definition, but it's just one of the values that we can refer to that is kind of our engine, and we can tell it to do things. So we're referring to our engine, and we're going to say .get vertex buffer manager or object manager, and that's going to be our fourth parameter. Don't worry too much about what that means right now. Again, I'll explain some of this stuff later. The next thing that we might want to do is refer to our sPrite or our sPlayer, and we can just rotate it. So set rotation. This won't be a constant rotation. We're just going to rotate it once. So let's try and rotate it by 45 degrees. It has to be a float value, so just throw an F on there, and we have rotated our sprite. The next thing that we have to do is we have to refer to our scene and add our sprite to the scene. So again, we're going to say this scene dot add or attach child, which is an entity. A sprite is an entity. So we're going to refer to the player, and shabam. We have added our sprite to our scene, and then we say, hey, we've populated the scene, we're done with this, just go, just do whatever. Let's run this, make sure it works. And as you can see, our sprite is rotated 45 degrees. This is a normal sprite or a normal image, and then we rotate it. One other thing is, here's the center of the screen, and then we draw our sprite here. So technically this sprite isn't in the center. The top left corner of the sprite is in the center. So that's one other thing we have to take into account. But everything seems to be working. Again, if you guys are having troubles running your game on your emulator, check out the post on my bringback. I believe this is the 4th AndEngine tutorial. So just look at the 4th AndEngine tutorial on our website, the blog post. Down towards the bottom, I'll tell you how to fix your emulator or set up a new one, and make sure it works for you, because I'm just running out of time. So thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you later.